Right, good evening, everyone. I make it just about getting on for 7 o'clock. Welcome to this evening's webinar from Red Wing Solutions. It's all the R's tonight. It's reluctant returners. I can ask you all to mute your microphones. We are recording tonight's webinar, and once the webinar is concluded, I will upload it to YouTube and obviously share the link with those who have registered. So yeah, good evening everybody. I hope you're all really well. You'll notice that there's no camera this evening, and that's because I have washed my hair and had a shower and haven't had the time to dry said hair. So you really wouldn't want to see what's going on here tonight. It's best that it is behind the cloak of a photograph, I think. So we brought you here tonight to talk about reluctant returners. And it's something that not just early years is contending with. I guess we want to think of it that way. Here at Red Wing, we do a lot of continuous professional development. And today I've sat on 2 webinars, one of which was particularly interesting. And a lot of conversation in there was around health and safety and occupational health. And really seeing it from a perspective of obviously how, occupational health providers might consider the impact of furlough on those who have been furloughed for some time. And I think it is very interesting. I think a lot of people's mental health has been impacted by employers' decisions to furlough them. Not necessarily perhaps in early years where you were told by the government to close your doors, but if you can imagine employers who've made decisions about who to keep working, who to allow to work from home and who to furlough. The occupational health advisors were saying that a lot of people have struggled really to feel that they weren't important, that they perhaps weren't wanted, that there was somebody that could be done without. And yes, hey ho, 1st of July, they've been asked to return to the office on a part-time basis. So fascinating stuff. I absolutely love learning about people. And obviously it's why we do what we do here at Red Wing. So what's our plan for this evening? Well, we have a number of slides. First slide is obviously our objectives for this evening's session. So hopefully by the time you finish with us this evening, you will understand how to address some different scenarios that we've got for you in relation to different reasons people might be reluctant to return to work. Hopefully you'll understand what will be required of yourselves to address each of those issues. And then we'll talk at the end about some general principles about what's expected of you as employers. And we may well have some time for some questions at the end as well. If you have a question, just type your question into the chat box. And I've got that up on my screen and I will see that towards the end. And we'll be able to go through those if the webinar itself doesn't answer your question. So first of all, I want to talk to you about a group that we are calling in our office the no-tars. And these are people for whom you may have approached probably getting on for a month ago now to advise them that you were to reopen and that you were looking for them to return to work. So, a month, well, 6 weeks ago, you approached these people and they would have said to you that they weren't really feeling it about coming back to work. They're the no-tars. So there isn't a particular reason, so that a lot of what we're going to talk about this evening are particular people with particular reasons why they would like to remain on furlough. The no-tars are the ones who basically would rather that you left them at the back of the queue. So these are the ones for whom, if you had a line, if any of you can remember games when you used to be lined up and popular people would be picked first to play in a team, and then the people at the end were the people that were perhaps not considered sporty or not considered sporty and not considered perhaps people that were going to aid the team. And those are the people who perhaps were left. Well, in a line, the no-tars are very keen to be left at the end with the people who perhaps aren't known for their sporting prowess. They just don't want to be back in work if there's any way that it can be avoided. So these are the no-tars, and we call them that, and Sue labelled it that as such, that when you're teaching a little person to speak, obviously one of the things they first come out with is no and tar. So the no-tars are, please leave us where we are. We're quite happy being on furlough, and we'll be quite happy not to come back to work. We haven't got a particular reason, but we won't want to return if we can avoid it. And some of the conversations that our employers have had to have with the notares, particularly around, you know, them saying to you that perhaps they want to be off in June and July, August, and not back till September, is that, you know, if that's going to happen, we might need to look at other options. Can everyone turn off their audio? Other options including unpaid leave. And as I say, we call this group. Please turn off your audio. Thank you. So let's look at the first group of people that we wanted to talk about this evening. And these are our shielding Shonas. If everyone can turn off their audio, that would be fantastic. Shielding Shona, she's received a shielding letter. She's got severe respiratory problems, and that's the reason why the NHS has written to her and asked her to shield. Let's just see if we can turn off the audio. Otherwise, we'll have to ask people to leave if they're not going to keep their audio muted. Okay, let's try that one. So shielding Shona, she has received an NHS shielding letter. She probably would have had a 12-week one when it came through. So she's probably been told as of now that as of the 1st of August, there's a pause to her shielding letter. So if you want her back after the 1st of August, if they're shielding letters themselves, if shielding is paused, she may well be in a position to return to work. At the moment, though, in July, the shielding letter gives her the status of clinically extremely vulnerable. Okay, now it doesn't matter whether shielding Shona is somebody who you know isn't self-isolating. And again, we've had this where people have got shielding letters, yet Facebook and social media shows that they are basically disregarding the instruction to shield. That's their business. If they've got a letter, they have the status of clinically extremely vulnerable. And as the employer, you are not meant to have them back at work unless they can work from home. So unless they can be WFH, they are intended to be somebody who would be either furloughed, or if you couldn't furlough them, on SSP until the 1st of August. Okay, now come 1st of August, they won't be able to be SSP'd because they're shielding. They may be unfit for work on the 1st of August, and I strongly suspect that some people may well have other conditions who are shielding that will lead them to say that they are unfit to work on the 1st of August, but they won't be able to be SSP'd because of their shielding alone. They will need to be perhaps on absence because they are now sick, and a doctor will obviously give them a statement after the self-certification runs out after 7 days. So in Shona's case, she's got a letter. She is somebody who has got severe respiratory problems. You probably already know that about her, and you should, because obviously there would have been an opportunity for you to ask about any medical conditions that she has as part of your onboarding process anyway. And if, for most cases, there's been no great surprise when the employer said, guess what, because of X, I've got Y being the shielding letter from the NHS. The employer wasn't at all surprised. They knew of the problem, and they weren't surprised that the NHS had reached out to their employee in this way. But what has also happened, and what I wanted to talk about at this point, are people who will claim to be living with people who are shielding, and people who will claim to have conditions that they believe should warrant them being furloughed and off work. Now, this has happened in the concept of people saying, well, my doctor has suggested, or my midwife has suggested, or even my doctor has told me, or my midwife has told me that I shouldn't be at work. And they aren't clinically extremely vulnerable. So if you remember the vulnerability declaration that we did, gosh knows how many weeks ago that must have been, probably a good 2 months away. And we basically, on that form, broke down the clinically vulnerable and the clinically extremely vulnerable so that you could use that as a checklist to see which of the conditions your employees had and which box they then felt that they fell into. So we've had people who are clinically vulnerable who would like to be considered clinically extremely vulnerable. And I'm afraid we've had to say to those people, without a shielding letter, we cannot treat you as clinically extremely vulnerable. Your doctor telling you something isn't the same as the NHS writing to you. And it might sound a bit black and white, and it is a bit binary. I think we do need to be kind, but also fair. And firm and fair, you know, are often hand in hand, aren't they? But we have to tell people quite straight that without X, Y can't happen, okay? And that's the response we would take. Now, we also have people for whom it's a bit confusing. Perhaps there's multiple conditions, some of which you knew about, some of which you didn't know about, and then perhaps only now exacerbated. And one of the exciting things I want to tell you about is at the bottom of this screen. And I only learned about this very, very recently. So the cost of occupational health has always been really prohibitive to early years. And recently we came across Phoenix Occupational Health, which are based in the Midlands. And I'm not sure, because I don't think that's going to work if I click that. Oh, it might. Whether we can go to their website. But if we can, I want to show you their website. Hopefully that's still sharing my screen with you. In the chat, if anyone can't now see Phoenix's website, please can you shout at me? No, you can't see.
Can't see.
Okay, let me see how we get on. So, new share. I tell you, we're getting better with tech, aren't we? But we're not there quite yet. Can anyone see that? Yes, you can. Brilliant. So this is Phoenix Occupational Health. Now, we have been limited in the past to occupational health, costing us around £200 for an appointment. Even before the days of COVID, they were often done over the telephone. They were often, you know, ideally based locally, but often done remotely. And really often we felt not much better value for money than if we'd applied for a GP's report and waited. So I was quite excited to find these people, A, because they're based in the Midlands, and B, because of something they're offering. Look at this, the COVID-19 triage call, a triage service developed to provide rapid medical vulnerability risk assessment in order to support the return of employees who may have health conditions that could impact the risk. We've also been doing this with the NHS since the start of the pandemic and have had many versions of the COVID risk assessments. We've adapted a version that meets our needs and also consider elements such as BAME and COVID age. Now, COVID age is interesting. COVID age, has anyone ever done skin age? Or there's another one, isn't there? I think skin age is the one I remember, where basically they look at your skin through one of these cameras and they can tell you what your skin age is in relation to your actual age. And you'll either be absolutely devastated or absolutely delighted, one of those two things. Well, COVID age is the same sort of thing. So you might start off as a healthy 24-year-old, but then if you're female, your age will come down. If you're male, your age will go up. And if other factors will send it up and other factors will send it down. So really fascinating that they're now also measuring your COVID age. Now, this is the service they offer. A telephone assessment with an individual to discuss their concerns, a discussion around the risks for both contracting COVID and developing complications, a medical report that will be provided that will give an opinion on that individual's medical vulnerability to COVID-19 and whether they should shield. Also, we advise of any adjustments or support that may be required. Appointments can be made quickly and reports are provided within the hour. And this is the exciting bit. The cost per call is £35 plus VAT. Now that, to me, with an occupational advisor, for a 20-minute call plus a report is excellent value for money. Because if we're ever to get people come back to us and say, you know, because of my disability, I was made to return to work and I felt that it was a health and safety risk. You heard me talk previously about Section 44 and Section 100 of the Employment Rights Act and how we all are quite scared as HR consultants and employment lawyers as to how many people might be prepared to take their employers to court rather than go back to work. And this sort of service, being able to access this and be able to get a definitive yes you should or no you shouldn't, and the yes you should would be delivered in exactly the same way I was just describing, you know, firm but fair. I'm afraid your condition doesn't mean you're any greater risk to return to that workplace that we've had described to us. And they'll take into consideration the fact that you've got your COVID risk assessments in place, you've done everything you need to do under the guidance that you've been issued as an early years provider. All of that information goes into the making of that report. So I think for that money, I'm very impressed, and other HR consultants are very impressed with it as well and are using it. And, you know, I'm going to very much see if we can get something happening with these people, because I'm very excited that we've got this development. Right, let me go back and share my original screen. So, new share, back to Shona. Okay, so we should be back to Shona now. Right. Let's go to our next person. I've seen you put a question, Gillian, and we will come back to you. I've seen your question, we'll come back to you at the end. Right. Let's see if I can get away from this then. Bear with me, folks, I'm just having a few technical problems here. I've managed to get it onto 2 screens. Are you seeing my slides again, folks? Or are you still seeing? You are seeing my slides. Excellent. Okay. So protective Pete. So again, well, but returning to work is an issue for him because his partner is pregnant. He doesn't want to risk picking up the virus at work and taking it home, and also wants to throw into the mix that he's got vulnerable and elderly mother that he's caring for. So again, this sort of situation is an issue for employers, because the employer, on the face of it, has got an employee here who is neither clinically vulnerable or clinically extremely vulnerable, but they're worried, and they're worried because they feel protected. Now, as somebody who might live with somebody who is clinically vulnerable, they can pop onto the government website and see what the guidance is for living with somebody who is clinically vulnerable. There won't be much guidance on there because they're not clinically extremely vulnerable. So it's the usual things such as hand washing and hand hygiene, making sure that you don't, have visitors round, that you do respect your bubble, that you and your household are the ones who are within 2 meters of each other, and everyone else keeps their distance. And as a pregnant woman, his partner would again be well versed in this from her medical advisors, whether they be the consultant or the midwife. So the protective Pete is often somebody who perhaps just needs to be reassured. So a lot of education needs to go into our health and safety processes these days, doesn't it? So it's not just about developing the risk assessment and involving your staff in that development. It's about making sure that those who are furloughed have seen the risk assessment, have been educated into the practices that you've put in place. I always think you can communicate as well as you possibly can. So showing people what it's like, producing videos, showing images, sending to people who are furloughed as much information as you can, but even better, getting them in to come and have a look before they return to work. So reassurance is what's needed for protective Pete, because he doesn't have the right to say that he doesn't return, that he remains on furlough. And clearly that's the option you have, is to ask him to return from furlough and come back to work. Caring for his vulnerable and elderly mother, again, vulnerable doesn't mean shielding. Vulnerable might mean that she's over 70 and that he's doing her shopping. But again, he probably, if he doesn't live with the mother, is socially distancing from his mother. She is obviously, in her own home. She would obviously be taking social distancing very seriously. If he's doing the shopping for her, she might decide to carry out any sort of wiping down of the goods that he brings back, if that's what she chooses to do. He won't be necessarily touching many of her items in her home when he goes in there, and if he does, he'll be wiping them down after them, or he'll be placing the delivery for his mum to unload. At the end of the day, caring for his vulnerable and elderly mother can be done, and he can still be looking after his partner, and he can be coming back to work. You've just got to reassure the protective Petes. Fearful Fiona. And again, this one is a classic one, and I think in some parts of the country being more felt than others. There was just a report on the TV this evening about the train stations and how few people are now travelling and commuting into our major cities, and how long the train companies and those that run the train stations fear that this will continue. I do think everybody is now thinking that a lot of people are enjoying working from home, and there will be an increased desire for people to be able to work from home. I am hopeful that that won't necessarily mean that people will want to care for their own children in their own home whilst they're working, because we still need childcare for those who do work from home to work effectively. So Fiona is fearful because she's worried about getting on a bus, and she lives in an area which means that the only way for her to get to work is by bus. There isn't going to be an alternative transport network for her. She can't suddenly cycle or get one of these e-scooters or do anything like that. She's got to travel by bus. And again, for many people, that may well be that she doesn't earn enough to drive, or she doesn't have the facility to drive a car or to own a car, or perhaps hasn't ever got herself a licence. So again, these could be childcare workers who are reliant on buses. She's expressed strong concerns about the risks of working with children. And she's the sort of person who might well be in a union and have started to write those letters to her employer that suggests that there is a Section 44 / Section 100 situation arising here. Now, in that case, with a fearful Fiona, again, you've got to work out whether there is any alternatives. Where does Fiona live in relation to other staff? Would there be an option to offer Fiona another means of coming, to work, like perhaps sharing a car with a colleague, or coming into the office, as a backseat passenger of a colleague who she's going to work with? Perhaps as a backseat passenger, she could also wear a mask, and the driver could wear a mask, and that might well be more safe for her. Could she be put into a taxi? Again, taxi drivers in some cases have got screens between the back of the vehicle and the front. Many taxi drivers are wearing masks, so they're not breathing out droplets into the environment of the vehicle, and are wiping the vehicle down between fares, would be the right term. So would that make her feel better? When she's actually seen the buses, has she realised that only 20% of the capacity of a bus is probably being used these days? Bus companies have cut it right down. When she sees the bus, she might realise that she can be quite easily social distanced from other passengers. Very few people are on the bus. Those of us in Redditch and Tricia will understand this one. 20% on a Diamond bus would be a good day for Diamond, wouldn't it? And the situation she might fear might not be a reality. But if she's got that fear, remember, under the Employment Rights Act, she only has to have reasonable belief that her health and safety is in imminent danger. And the government has told us that COVID-19 disease is something that could cause us imminent danger. That's why they want us to stay at home as much as possible. That's why in certain parts of the UK they want us restricted.
And you add those things in?
All of those things. She wants, if she believes it, then that's a risk for you as the employer employing Fiona, that she's going to say that because of those things, she doesn't need to come to work because she believes it. And if she believes it, that's good enough. And this is why we're particularly concerned about allegations that are of a health and safety nature. Because remember, under Sections 44 and Section 100, if that employee is dismissed from their employment, they can claim automatic unfair dismissal. They don't need to have 2 years service. They can claim automatic unfair dismissal. Equally, if she resigns with under 2 years service, she can claim that she has been constructively dismissed because of a health and safety reason, and again, claim automatic unfair dismissal. So it's a very big, real fear. And whilst we haven't yet seen a case taken that far, I believe it's only a matter of time before that happens. So I would go back to saying that it's all about responding to Fiona and educating her as to what you've put in place, how you've gone over and above what's expected of you in the guidance, all of your procedures, all of your policies, all of your protocols, seeing all the signage, seeing firsthand exactly how it works, that parents don't come into the building, that this is how we do handover, this is our procedure if a child was to be taken ill, this is what we've bought to protect the staff member if they were caring for a child who had a temperature, this is our temperature checking routine and regime, whether we do that with every baby that comes in through the door or whether we ask mum to have done that and told us what it is. However you're doing it, that information is passed on to fearful Fiona, because we're trying to say to her, I understand that you've got these concerns, and that's absolutely fine that you feel that way, but we actually feel that we can demonstrate to you that it is sufficiently safe for you to return to work, and you needn't worry about your health and safety. Now, we've got to remember why we have those laws, because some people are being put in harm's way. Some employers aren't good employers and don't give two hoots about social distancing, don't give two hoots about health and safety. You know, I have a cousin, and I've just seen this evening that my cousin's partner has had her hair done, and it looks lovely, but she's had it done. There's no masks, there's no nothing. She's in the salon, and guess what? They're there on the 1st of July when the salons don't open until the 4th of July. So there are people who are taking risks, and maybe that's because their employers are making them take these risks. And therefore, it's worth knowing why we have these laws to protect employees in this kind of situation.
You're 3 now, you're 3 years old.
Okay, I can't turn the person off who's muted, because unfortunately I've managed to move my mouse onto another screen. So if the person could do that for themselves, that would be fantastic. Okay, let's move on. So the next person I want to tell you about is Struggling Stanley. Stanley works for yourselves, and he's got 3 children of primary school age. So that would be, can someone turn off their microphone, please? Please.
No, it wasn't. It was in a day, wasn't it? On a Saturday day.
Can you press mute, please? Thank you. Struggling Stanley. So Struggling Stanley has got 3 children of primary school age and is unable to return to the workplace until all of his children are back at school. So that would be what? 3 children under 11, between the ages of 5 and 11. So in Stanley's case, obviously by being furloughed because he's got childcare concerns, he has benefited from the fact that his school has been closed and now is perhaps open to children in year 6. Yes, I want to say year 6, because we don't have that around here. It does throw me a little bit, because obviously you don't leave school at the end of year 6 around here. So did throw me for a moment. Yeah, year 6. So year 6 are able to return, aren't they, as are children who are deemed vulnerable or children of key workers. And obviously other age groups are now being sort of phased back in, aren't they, depending on the school and depending on how they're doing things. So if Stan has 3 children under 11 and they're not in school, it's quite likely Stan has told you why he and his partner, or perhaps he on his own, feel that the school is not a place for their child until whenever. And we've heard everything in the last few weeks. We've heard people like Stan say, my child won't be going back to school until September. We've heard that one. We've also heard people saying, my child won't be going back to school until there's a vaccine, whenever that might be. Or my child might not be going back to school until I deem it's safe for them to do so because of X, Y, and Z. So everything from we've got a major holiday planned in the summer, right through to, grandparents are having some surgery and we're nervous of them catching anything. Lots of reasons. So people have their own private reasons why they want to keep their children off school. And one thing we've learned over COVID-19 pandemic is, I think, as humans, we've got to perhaps accept people's views on the education of their children rather than try and perhaps describe our views to them and hope that they might see things differently. So, you know, with the Stans of this world, there is probably little point you trying to persuade them that their child would be perfectly safe at school if they believe differently. But what you can do is outline a few steps. So first of all, it is reasonable for an early years provider, an early years employer, to outline to Stan that their children could be back at school because Stan would be identified as a key worker. And there is a letter that Stan can send to his school to request a space. I've heard this week of a Stan, if you like, who was told by his employer and by his school that his child's situation, I can't think whether it was an EpiPen or I think there was a medical condition. Yes, I think there was a medical condition. It wasn't an allergy. A medical condition that meant that they felt that they couldn't provide a space for that child. Now, I am sorry, but schools, when they start saying to parents, you can't access education for your child because of your child's disability, are looking down the barrel of a disability discrimination claim, and the school should be pulled up on that. Somebody should be approaching that school and explaining a few home truths to them that, you know, really it's not okay for them to pick and choose which children come to school. You know, that's not fair, and you know, that's not right, really. So they might have to have a letter to say we want a space, and they can have that provided by yourselves and helped through by yourselves, or they perhaps can have you write to that school on the Stan's behalf and say, we need Stan back at work, we therefore need you to provide Stan with spaces for his children because he's a key worker. And I've seen both of those work really well. The other thing that needs to be explained to Stan is ultimately that because he has children under 18, he can request parental leave, and he can request parental leave for each of his 3 children. So technically he could take 4 weeks per child in any year. So with 3 children of school age, I'm assuming now that Stan hasn't been a busy boy and hasn't got children in secondary school, but for the purposes of this, he's just got the 3. He could potentially have 12 weeks unpaid leave in a 12-month period to care for his children. And that would be perfectly reasonable for him to request. Now, I don't mean that's necessarily something you could accommodate, but it would be reasonable for him to ask. And what we are expected to do as employers during COVID-19 is to try where possible to be flexible and to assist people. So whereas you might have needed, and I think that the guidance is you give a minimum of 3 weeks notice for a parental leave application, you might, you know, get less than a week in some cases. If you can accommodate a parental leave application for 4 weeks and give that person unpaid parental leave to therefore care for their children, that is what is expected of you to do. If you can, you should, okay? There's 2 reasons why we should. If we do that, then we get the situation that might be bubbling along, which is I want Stan back, but he doesn't want to come back, resolved. So it's off your, out of your line of sight, off your radar. You can forget about it and move on to someone else. So Stan being out might mean that you need to get someone else back off furlough, or you might need to rejig your plans. But once you've made that decision and they're not part of it, it is off your radar. Secondly, obviously it stands right. And what we don't want is someone making a complaint, i.e. a grievance to their employer, that they have perhaps been denied the parental leave regulations. So the maternity and parental leave regulations of 1999 are there, and breaching those as an employer can face consequences. So we don't want someone to perhaps go to the hassle of raising a grievance, having a grievance hearing, having an appeal because they didn't like the outcome of the hearing, having an outcome to that appeal, going to ACAS, and so on and so on. And all the while you're trying to deal with that plus run your nursery. So there's lots of reasons why it might be a good idea to consider allowing people to take unpaid parental leave. And in this situation, again, best not to suggest that he's wrong in his view that the children can't go back to school, because in my experience, if they've got that opinion, you might as well just let them have that opinion rather than to challenge it as being not your opinion. Okay, symptomatic Steve. So Steve has been contacted by NHS Test and Trace. So we all know how this one works, because there's been enough about it in the papers, isn't there, and on the telly. But Steve has obviously somehow managed to get himself in the line of sight of somebody who's got a positive test. Now, again, I suppose I want to reinforce this at the moment. You know, Steve may have been, you know, at a rave for all we know, or he may well have been, you know, with some people for whom they were asymptomatic. Again, scary facts I heard today about what percentage of people who tested positive had symptoms. And I was reading about somebody who had tested 1,000 people for the NHS, and 8% of those tests were positive, but only 2% of those people who were tested knew that they were likely to fail that test and that they had symptoms. So it left 6% who basically were asymptomatic at the point of test. And that's quite scary, isn't it? You know, people that were testing positive but didn't know they had it. But it's increasingly common. And they think a huge percentage of people that that have had it don't know they've had it because they've just really had a mild illness and haven't been terribly inconvenienced by it. And that's really good to hear. I think some of the problem with COVID-19 is people think that they will get it and they will die. And we need to make sure that we're as much educating to people that in the vast majority of cases, people get a mild illness, and particularly children. Some children, I think, have had it and won't even have known they've had it. A mild illness, and you'll be fine. It's the minority that I'm afraid who suffer complications. And we now know that it's not a respiratory illness, that it's a blood-borne illness. And it's obviously that saturation in the blood that causes the problem. So Steve's been contacted to say he's been around somebody who's had coronavirus and now must self-isolate for the next 14 days. So rather than be at work as a returner, Steve, whether he's been on furlough, and he has been on furlough, you can keep him on furlough, but if you were intending to have him back from furlough and he's now not available for work, his options and your options are for him to take, to do something else. Now, obviously, if his job meant that he could work from home, if he's only self-isolating, he could work from home. If his job doesn't mean he can work from home, he could be on SSP. And he could be on SSP because he's been told to self-isolate. And you could claim for the full 14 days of the SSP back from the government if your payroll is of the size that you can do that. Claim for the full 14 days back from the government because the government have told you that he can't come to work for 14 days because of coronavirus. So remember, we can only reclaim the SSP for people who are off for a coronavirus related reason. And self-isolation is one of those. So he's going to be off for 14 days. Let's also now think at the same time about what it would be if Steve had been one of your room leaders and perhaps responsible for a bubble of children in your day nursery. Well, again, if he has been told to self-isolate, it doesn't mean that other people in his bubble need to self-isolate. He's been told to self-isolate. However, if Steve had been the one that had contracted COVID-19, rather than somebody who'd been exposed to somebody who had it, then he would obviously need to go home and stay home for 14 days, so for 7 days. And his family that live with him would need to stay home for 14 days. And those that work with him, whether that be other children or other adults, they would also be self-isolating. So it's very dramatic, isn't it? This idea that test and trace will contact people. I think what we've also got to remember is there is a lag between somebody perhaps sending a test result back to the lab from a home test and those results coming through. And I know from my own personal family that can take a long time. So, you know, you may well be dealing with more symptomatic Steves over the coming weeks and months as more people get tested. And, you know, anyone with a temperature of over 37.8 may well be invited to be tested because they've got one symptom. Doesn't mean you don't have to have all symptoms to be tested. You could have one symptom and be tested. Or because of your profession, you could be asymptomatic and tested because we want to know what's going on in your profession. So there's going to be a lot more testing done and therefore a lot more people told that they've got positive results. Set Josephine. Okay, I'll finish on a high. We would have been back from our holidays today. We would have been. It was Tuesday. I think we came back yesterday and we would have been back at work today. But there you go, we didn't go to USA. I'm pretty glad I didn't, to be fair, given what's been going on over there. So no more holiday treatment, that's for sure. But Set Josephine, she has got a big holiday booked. And I wanted to tell you about this one because I've actually had a conversation with Set Josephine's employer, husband, because her employer has already been in touch. So she's got a trip booked to Canada, big 3-week trip, doesn't come back until the 4th of September. And in her case, she is obviously, you know, at the moment, into where the current status is, she's of the opinion that there won't be a corridor between the US and Canada and England, and that she will not be able to avoid quarantining for 14 days when she gets back. The employer in this case obviously may want Set Josephine back at work, and I'm sure if she's due back on the 4th of September, by the 5th they'll probably want her back at work. So what does that employer do and how do they treat those 14 days? Well, she isn't self-isolating for COVID because she's been exposed to it. So there's going to be no SSP, okay? Set Josephine could work from home if there was work from home to be done. Equally, because the employer is dealing with somebody who has booked this family wedding and booked this trip and probably had to have it agreed a long time ago for her to be off for 3 weeks, the employer will know that this is something that Josephine can't help. So disciplining Josephine for going on a trip that was already pre-booked prior to lockdown is going to get her and the employer nowhere fast. So unpaid authorised absence, if there isn't sufficient holiday for her to be paid to be off, is probably the only option that the employer of Josephine has. So you know she's not going to be back if she has to quarantine. What the employer can do is, and the Josephine can do, is hope that either the holiday to Canada will be cancelled because the government advice will still be don't travel to USA in August. They can hope that that can happen, and I'm sure wishful thinking might make things to happen. So they could hope that it would be cancelled. They could hope that she doesn't want to make the trip and she cancels it. Or they could think that, well, she makes the trip, let's hope that by then there might be an air corridor and we won't have to do quarantine for 14 days. But if she does, unpaid leave would be the best option for everybody. As I say, I wouldn't want to see Josephine disciplined for a trip that she'd already paid for and had booked, you know, probably at the latest is sort of in May, June time, not knowing whether she was going to travel in August. So I don't think she should be penalised for that. However, somebody who books a trip now to a country that might mean they have to quarantine. So they may, we don't think we've got the list quite yet, but we'll do it this week, aren't we? The list of where they've set up these air corridors, those countries that they have managed to get an arrangement with about quarantine, so that isn't necessary when those passengers return to the UK for them to be at home for 14 days. If they journey to a country that wasn't on that list and they booked that holiday now, and we've been told that a lot of people are booking holidays now, then in my mind, they've gone against the advice from the Foreign Office for nothing but non-essential travel. So it wouldn't be so unreasonable for the employer to discipline that employee because of their unavailability to work. Hope that makes sense. So what is expected before we take some questions? How are we doing for time? Employers are expected to try really hard. The government has put in place the furlough scheme at huge expense to all of us, probably for the next 100 years, in order to try and avoid large-scale redundancies. They do expect employers to try and be flexible. They don't expect, and I think it is a myth to say that anyone who was told to take parental leave could claim sex discrimination. I don't buy it. The law has never given a mother or a father the right to time off with pay because they have no childcare. We're not even meant to ask people about their childcare, are we? So how could that be fair? They aren't expected as employers, we aren't expected as employers to spend money you don't have. And I think, you know, you only have to watch the news where people are talking about what's going to happen come the end of July, what's going to happen come the end of August, when people start paying more for their furlough. You know, a lot of employers are announcing large whole-scale redundancies because they do not have the money to contribute towards the furlough scheme when they have to. And therefore, those employers aren't being told that they're bad employers suddenly because they can't create money they don't have. And in early years, you have been, since the 17th of April, been able to say to your employees, we are having to contribute towards furlough because of the way in which it has been structured for us. So that's a truism, so you can quote that. No one is to blame for COVID-19. Your employees definitely haven't created it. They haven't set out to be reluctant returners in many cases. A lot of people are feeling anxious. Some people will have been bereaved who work for you. They may well have been bereaved because of COVID or because of other reasons. 4 months of not going to work is a long time. And for many people, they feel like they can't face going back to work and they don't know whether they'll be able to do it if they do. People have become very isolated in their own homes, fearful to leave their front door, very much in their own bubble at home and safe and feel happy and satisfied there. They don't want to go to work. And obviously people are able to live on a lot less when we're not got anywhere to spend our money. So your employees who are reluctant returners, whether it be for any of the reasons we discussed tonight or other reasons, they need you to be kind, but be fair. And most of all, I want you to be fair to your staff, but also yourself. And yourself, you need to be fair to yourself is a very important message I want to get over this evening, is that, you know, saying yes to somebody you can't afford to say yes to does not equate to being fair to yourself. Okay? Right. Let's have a butchers at the questions and see what's what. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this now. Ooh, how I managed to break this screen. If I pull the plug on this screen, that might help. Right, should be able to see a picture of me now. So Gillian's question: if staff have been paid 100% as the setting had been paid via the funding, okay, so that's great. So you'd got your money, you didn't furlough anybody then, Gillian, and they don't want to return to work as they have chosen not to send their children to nursery school, although they have a key worker space. They're not shielding, they're not isolating. What would the actions be? Okay, so if you've sent your staff home on full pay, which would have been an option to employers who obviously didn't have furlough and didn't have layoff clauses. If the employer doesn't provide work, the employer still has to pay for it. You obviously can choose now when somebody comes back to work, and you can choose to stop the arrangement for them to have no work and for them to return to work at your choice. And as we've said with previous people this evening, if your person says they don't have the desire for their child to send their other child to nursery, then if they need to be off because of childcare, then the day you say we're stopping the arrangement for you to be paid to stay at home is the day they start their unpaid leave, Gillian. Okay. So Tricia, does Set Josephine have to take her 14 days in self-isolation and this be given as unpaid leave? Yeah, the 14 days in quarantine would have been a better way for me to word it. It can be given as unpaid leave. If you look on the government website for quarantine at the minute, it leads with, you know, can they be given work from home, or can they use additional holiday that they might have? The government's very keen for those on quarantine to be paid. But if you don't have the holiday for them to take, if you don't have work for them to do from home and be paid in full, they have to take unpaid leave because they have in themselves they are in themselves unavailable to come to work, so unavailable to fulfill the contract of employment, so you don't have to pay them. And you know, it would be a discussion for me for much nearer the time. As I said, Josephine's partner came on the phone because he works for one of our clients, and his wife's employer had already written what we will call technically as a shitty letter to Josephine to tell her that, you know, if she wasn't back in school on the 4th of September, she can kiss goodbye to her job. And it was such a rude letter, obviously written by somebody who was very frustrated that this employee might not be in work until virtually the end of September, given the 14-day quarantine. The only thing we could say to that employer is that they're clearly very stressed, and they should have waited, because that is not a letter that needed to be sent in June. That could be a letter that was sent in August, which was based on looking like you won't be able to come back to work, so this is what's going to happen, not threatening them now when they can do nothing about it. They don't know whether their holiday will take place. They don't know whether they will need to quarantine on their return. There's so many variables. We're too far out to know what to do. Can I ask, do staff still accrue holiday on unpaid leave? Yes, they do. Yeah, absolutely. The only circumstance where an employee might not accrue holiday would be on a sabbatical. And sabbaticals can be short. So you could agree a 4-week sabbatical. I haven't done it recently. And, you know, with sabbaticals, again, because somebody has parental leave, you'd expect them to probably take that as a first option. But a sabbatical might mean that they would be off for, say, 6, 8, 12 weeks. And you would agree the terms of the sabbatical would be that they don't accrue holiday. So if somebody perhaps is looking to take extended leave in one go, and for you to agree to it, it might be worth investigating sabbaticals, and do ask a HR consultant to help you. Hello, Elise. I have an employee who we've agreed to authorise unpaid leave. They are still reluctant to come back. Okay, we've gone through our policies and assessments and they've not identified anything that we're not doing right. It feels like they're looking for anything not to return. COVID can be passed on via children's feces. Yeah, it can apparently. All those dirty so-and-sos that left stuff in Bournemouth on the beach, apparently the infection the virus can live in your feces. Lovely, isn't it? So gloves and aprons and masks as they want them. What about them not doing nappy changing, Elise? Would that resolve their concern if they weren't on nappy changing duty? Obviously, you always wear gloves. Well, I'd be wearing a hazmat suit if I went and changed a child's nappy. They wear gloves and aprons anyway, don't they? I mean, I guess masks could be available to them if that would make them feel happier. What's the cost of a plastic mask these days? I know you have to have them anyway in case a child becomes unwell, but what's the cost of getting extra ones for those who want to wear them during nappy changes in case of a splash? Again, what more can you do? You know, ultimately, don't give them the choice. If they don't come back to work after you've told them furlough is lifted, then ultimately it is unpaid leave. And you know that at least would be my position. Once the job is there, furlough is no longer applicable once work needs to be done. It's your gift to give furlough, not their right to have. We have a member of staff who's requested to be the last to come back as they've got COPD. So that's a pretty nasty respiratory illness, isn't it? And I think they were on the extremely vulnerable list, people with COPD. However, I have been told by another staff member that while she's furloughed, she's working as a frontline home carer. Okay, so again, I'd want to establish whether she's shielding or whether she's just vulnerable. Is she just clinically vulnerable or is she clinically extremely vulnerable? Because if she's going against a shielding letter, again, you know, to what extent have you as under health and safety got a duty to remind her of what that means? So if she's been told to shield, she's not been told to go and work as a home carer. I always think that, you know, we have to take with a pinch of salt sometimes what we hear, but I think it's worth investigating and having a chat. So again, with somebody who's furloughed, they should be available for work during their working hours. Obviously, if they have took a job elsewhere, then they might well need to, obviously, when you ask them to come in to meet with you, to socially distance meet with you or to do a Zoom meeting with you, they might end up letting you know their circumstances. We've had that happen. So it might be worthwhile trying to arrange a phone call for, say, 10:30 on a Wednesday, when if they are working as a home carer, that's when obviously they'll be at work. Ask them to come and see you for a socially distanced meeting. If your setting is back open, that's perfectly reasonable and civil, isn't it? You could meet somebody outside with two chairs quite safely, and ultimately ask them as to, you know, to what extent they're ready to return. Now, if they do come in for a meeting, that again tells you they're not shielding. If they tell you they're shielding, where's the letter? Have you got a copy of it? And you can ask them, can't you, as to, you know, how are they managing with their shielding? Are they having food delivered? Are they going out at all? And I'm sure they'll tell you if they're going out to work as a home carer. Nothing isn't known, you see. Once somebody is furloughed and then their national insurance number is used elsewhere, their tax code is going to go for you. Their tax, you know, their second job will be at 20% or so, won't it? So, you know, everything is traceable, everything is known. They may well have took up references. They may well, you know, may be approaching you for a reference in due course. They may not want to come back to the nursery. We've had people who have tried other jobs since furlough and have loved it and have had to say to their employers, and you know, they always say awkwardly, I'm not sure if I want to come back. Well, you know, I think by that sentence, that means I probably don't want to come back. And we've had employers learn that perhaps they've lost a member of staff during furlough because they've tried something else and they like it. But you're absolutely right to ask. Elise is saying you've offered, they're not on furlough, it's unpaid leave. So where do they stand? So you want them to come back to work on their unpaid leave. You need to unauthorise the unpaid leave, Elise, and turn it from being authorised unpaid leave to unauthorised unpaid leave. And if they don't return, then it's a disciplinary matter. If you remove the authorisation, it's disciplinary. No problem at all. Right, okay, everybody, no more questions I can see. I will edit reluctant returners and upload it to YouTube. Hope that's been useful to you this evening for us to have a chat about returners. And as I say, and I'm very excited with the idea of a triage service from an occupational health service like Phoenix. I think that's an excellent resource and definitely something that we can make use of here at Red Wing. And for that sort of price, I think that's incredibly effective. Anyway, good to speak to you all, and I hope you found that useful, and I hope you have a lovely evening. I'm going to go and dry what's left of my not so dry hair now. All the best. Bye-bye.